Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Anthropology 415, 515 Ethnographic Methods. We are on Friday of week 5. It is the 20th of September. Welcome back. We're going to finish up our discussion on participant observation today. We'll talk about your homework and how you're doing on that as well. And then next week, we'll be talking about field notes and how we might take them. So it's going to be kind of continuation of this week. We're talking about like the act of doing primarily. Today, and then next week we'll talk about like how you might write those down. Some of you have turned in your homework already, and it's good first try. But we'll refine kind of like your note-taking process and what kind of stuff we want to actually see in there next week. But the really important thing for this week is just get yourself out into those communities, start to make those connections. That's why I switched, we jumped from chapter 5 to chapter 13. And that's because it's important for you to just at least start trying to find a community. And if you're having a hard time getting in, you're like, oh, this isn't working. Oftentimes it just takes a little bit and you have to kind of keep pushing that. So that's again why I put it early on in the semester. If I had waited till week 13 for you to start it, then probably by week 14 or 15, you're like starting to freak out about not having your participant observation. So this gives you a lot more time to work on that because remember, you are going to need, here's your paper outline. For you undergrads, you're going to need at least 5 of these participant observation events, 2 in person, 2 virtual, while grads 8 to 10. So it's going to take a little bit of time. And hopefully, we're going to do 2 of these in-person events, hopefully this week. And this week and next week with our field notes activity, and then we'll do a virtual one in the following week with virtual activity. So at least for undergrads, you'll have 3 of those done, and you only have 5 total. So that's not terrible. Again, one of the reasons I like to do that is because not only do you get good information and data from doing participant observation, it's going to help you meet people and get those connections. So when you want to do your interviews or do your questionnaires, you've collected your research population already, or you at least started to. So you're able to administer that survey versus if I just gave it to you first, you'd be like, I don't know who to give this to. Okay. This week we also have quiz number 3. And we've answered 2 of these questions already. And we're going to answer the 3rd one today. So far, we've talked about, there it is. Researcher's positionality. We'll actually talk a little bit about this a little bit more today. But we've talked about it already, who you are and, what your positionality, your age, your gender, your wealth, your race, or ethnicity, or any of that kind of stuff influences how people treat you in communities, and then how it might give you access to certain types of ethnographic data, but might also keep you from others. We'll also talk about subjectivity and objectivity today. How do we overcome this, and is it even necessary? Is it possible to even be strictly objective? And then finally, there's 7 stages of field work. I made a little chart. We'll talk about it. I'll put it on the doc cam. Entering the field, doing your thing, and getting out, and all in one piece. Okay. So that's it. Remember, you also have your participant observation. Have anybody in class started on that? Or at least have ideas about what you might want to do? Or on the online space?
There's actually a UFO group in Albuquerque that's fairly active.
Yeah.
Rented out a coffee shop tomorrow.
That's cool. It's apparently the most active UFO research organization in the country. I saw their sign. I was just like, I was impressed. I was like, oh, that's pretty cool, like for our students doing that. So you're going to go to that in Albuquerque? Nice. Anybody else? Someone online, turn on the camera. Thing to add?
Can you guys see me?
Yes.
I'm going to be observing a paranormal activity investigation with a group called the Hemet Ghost Hunters.
Cool. That's super awesome.
There was at first they said no because they didn't want to they do a lot of private investigations, but I was able to get approval for them to do it on base where I work, where there's this like super old haunted hospital turned into a daycare.
That's fantastic.
Really interesting.
Yeah, I look forward to reading that one. Anybody else got anything? Those sound like great activities. If you're still wondering about what you're going to do, there's plenty of time. But again, don't put it off to the end because a lot of your other methods can build off of this. And we'll talk about that today as well. Okay, so I wanted to make sure we got all the answers to the quiz, especially. This first one about positionality is important, and Bernard talks about this is on like page 72, 73, something like that, about who we are and how that might impact us. What's a good example of how your positionality might impact you as a researcher and the types of data you might be able to gather? But what is positionality first? Or you get scared off by the big words. What's your positionality?
It's like your role in society.
Yeah, your roles, multiple roles, right? Basically, like if you were going to make a checklist, kind of bare bones descriptor of who you are, right? I am a middle-aged, sadly, white male, father of two, working at I'm an educator, right? All these different kinds of things. I belong to this church, or I belong to this organization, or I grew up an Army brat, or whatever, right? All these things that go into your identity. And just like Jay said, they're roles. And like we talked about an intro to cultural, roles are like hats, right? So certain times I wear my hat as a teacher, other times I'm wearing my hat as a dad. And so you can kind of think about who you are and what your positionality is, right? What are some examples of how those different roles that you inhabit might either open doors for you or make it more difficult for you to gather certain information while you're doing field work? 3 examples would be great because that's your quiz question for this week. We'll just go around the room and you can tell me because there's only 3 of you.
Mm-hmm.
So what's an example of a positionality that you in particular have that might open doors in some kinds of research and maybe make it difficult in other ones?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a student. So your role as a student here at Eastern, what types of research would be easier for you to access as a student at Eastern? What kind of things how might that open doors for you? You can go to student events. You can talk to the professors, right? So the professor's not like, "Who are you? Why are you wasting my time?" You're like, "Oh, you're paying my salary, so of course I'll talk to you." If you're looking at, like we talked about the other night, Jay, your idea of haunted Eastern and like the different ghost stories and kind of hauntedness around campus, it's going to be a lot easier for you to do that as a student, right? Because you can talk to the people who you need to, and you're just around campus more, right? What are some other things that a student might not help you do? Maybe not over that same project, but just other types of projects that you might do where being a student might be a disadvantage. Yeah, right. If I wanted to study at CERN, like the nuclear physics laboratory over in Switzerland, and they'll be like, "No, you're like a student. We only let like PhDs in here," right? And so you might not have the proper credentials as a student. You might have to like continue on and get your master's and then become a professional before you get access. What's another example of a positionality you might have? Gavin, what's a positionality you might have? Yeah.
Women aren't gonna want to talk to me about certain things.
Yeah, right. If you're asking about childbirth, they might be like, "Nah," like so that's like women's knowledge, right? And different cultures, it might be slightly different, but it seems to be one of those cross-cultural things that women are more likely to talk about, childbirth to other women than to men, right? But again, you might have access that might open doors in other ways, right? Like there might be certain activities that men are doing in a certain society that you might have access to. What's another one, Jose? Give me an obscure one.
Ethnicity could be one.
Yeah, right.
Society.
What did you gain from being Spanish when you were doing your field work versus if you had identified as American or Mexican, right?
Well, to me, because they communicate with a lot of modern people.
Yeah.
As if be Spanish, people were more like, "Oh, they're Spanish." You kind of more like, "Oh, you know, I'm farm." It's always stuff like that. They give you more perspective towards. Kind of made it easier for me to connect to people because they idea of like, oh, it's another
Yeah.
auto body, I guess.
Especially because you're like, I'm from a rural place and
I was a cowboy, you know, about cattle.
Yeah.
It kind of opens up more opportunities for people more likely to talk to you because you can make something in a way of like, I can push it.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Did it ever hold you back?
It did sometimes, especially when it comes to like the authority figures in this, especially those that have higher education. They'll probably, they're like, oh, well, like, you know, this is a racial bias. We're like, oh, you know, I know Spanish, and that's smart. And usually they're associated to be with cartel.
Yeah.
I was born in Mexico. The first one I was like, oh, I'm Spanish. They're like, oh, so you're cartel.
Yeah.
It wasn't, oh, you're like, no, you're a student, like a cartel.
Yeah.
So it did backfire me because I had to then explain to them a lot.
And what are you doing in our community, cartel man?
Yeah.
Which is not like a unfounded thing, right? Cartels are operating like 10 miles, 15 miles away across the border, right? So the idea that a cartel member might be coming into Belize is not, unfounded.
Correct. It causes an issue to where like it disrupts your kind of like flow of energy.
Mm-hmm.
And they have to work a little extra hard to get that stuff to that person.
Yeah. But yeah, in other ways, like being able to speak Spanish, people always just love to speak Spanish. They're like, oh, you can teach me Spanish so I can like watch TV in Guatemala, like, I don't know if I should be the one teaching you Spanish. It's not going to work out well. But yeah, and you can think about this for anything, right? Whether it's I grew up poor, so I relate to these, poor indigenous farmers because, we didn't have anything growing up either. Or I grew up on a farm, or I used to work this job, or I used to work construction during the summer. And so when I go to my house buildings, everyone's excited because I know how to like hammer things properly or use a screw gun or something like that, right? So just think about all those different roles. I think Jay's idea of roles is a great one because you can just kind of list all the roles that you might have, and you might think of 3 different ways that might impact your field work. The second question is about objectivity. I just want to do all these questions because they're good like roadmaps for the important things in the chapter, and you're going to have to answer them for your quiz this week. So if you're watching the video, this is a pretty important one. So the second question is about objectivity. Is field work being participant observation? And as we've established, I think already that this is a useful method for gathering data. Is this objective or subjective, and why? This is my Socratic teaching methods. Just ask you questions. Are we doing objective or subjective? Well, this is anthropology, so the answer is always yes, it's always both, right? It's always both. How might doing participant observation be objective, right? Well, what is objective first, I guess? What does objective research look like, or what does that even mean? Do we even know? Can't answer the question, right? What is objective, man?
It's trying to like remove bias.
Yeah, right. That there is some kind of reality out there that is shared amongst all of us, right? That when I ask you how many cars are in the parking lot, if we all count, we should all get the same number, right? Because there is some kind of objective reality. I think we've kind of proved that after a couple hundred years of science that all of us are going to share some kind of objective reality, but leave it to anthropology to tell us that's probably not 100% correct, right? But within the like positivist tradition of Western science coming from the Enlightenment, we have this idea of objectivity, right? That if you do a chemistry experiment using the exact same formula that I do, that hopefully, all things being equal, it's going to come out the same. And we can apply that to cultural anthropology. Again, if we go out to the parking lot and I ask you how many red cars, how many green cars, how many silver cars, we probably should get at least pretty close to the same number, right? Is that an agreeable statement, right? So that's kind of objective, what I would mean by objective. And you can be, we can put it in an exotic setting. We're going to go to Maya Village all together, and I want you to do a household census. Tell me how many households there are in the community, and on average, how many people live in each house, right? It's a counting game. And hopefully, right, the number of houses isn't going to change, right? It's some kind of objective fact that we're all going to record, right? But how might those same situations be a little subjective? What about our car parking lot? How might this be subjective, not completely objective? How many cars of different colors are in the parking lot? Wouldn't I expect you to get all the exact same answers? 7 red, 4 blue, 6 yellow, and silver. Why not?
Everybody sees color different.
Yeah, right. You might have my car is old. The mechanic told me they don't work on antiques, and I was like, it's not an antique. He's like, it's 22 years old. That's an antique now. I'm like, oh, but it's been in the sun, and my kid always asks me, what color is our car? And I never quite sure. Is it gold? Is it green? Is it kind of gray? Like, it's not quite clear, right? And you might have that issue if I send you out in the parking lot, right? Is something, is silver really and gray two different colors? Do I count them the same? If I have like a two-tone car, how do I count that, right? If it's old and it's faded, is rust a color, right? Like how do we know, right? And that's even us in the same culture, not even going to like, Sapir-Whorf hypothesis theories of color in which Maya people won't even have a separate category for green or blue or gray. They're just going to say yash for everything, right? And you'd be like, why is 30% of the sample yash in yours, right? Well, that encompasses everything. So how we see the world is going to definitely influence how we divide it up. Let's take our second example of Maya community census, right? I can take you all the Belize. That'd be really fun. And we go, and today we're going to do a census. Tell me how many households are in the community and how many people live in each house, right? It's a simple census, and it's one of the very first things that you often do when you're doing just an observation. And we've established there are objective facts out there, right? We know the village of San Jose has 1,216 people and 146 households or something like that. But why might that be a subjective answer when I send you all around and ask you to collect that data? Yeah. Yeah. Do I count people who work primarily on the shrimp farm at the coast, 3 weeks out of every month of the year? Your primary residence is here, but you're not actually physically here. Or a student who's off, Juan Bull has been in the United States for 8 years at this point doing various schooling things, but he's still like a San Jose resident, right? And his parents might still count him as a resident. So we have the who actually counts within a household. Is somebody who's married, but their husband is, they're split up and their husband left somewhere else, so they count or not. The question of households might also be tricky. Why? What counts as a household?
Live in a house.
Yeah, right. You live in a house, but especially in a community like San Jose, often people live on compounds, right? So, oh, the Coes will live over in this area, right? And so there'll be a lot of physical structures, but how many households there are, especially in this community because of people cooking on fires. Oftentimes, a household will have at least two buildings, a living house and a cooking house, because your cooking house is thatched, and oftentimes your living house has like a metal roof. So how do you count that? Do you count, every cookhouse is, each household needs at least one cookhouse. What if there are multiple living houses, right? Like mom and dad live here and their grown kids live over here, but maybe they share a cookhouse. Do you count the compound? Do you count the individual structure? And especially within compounds, there's often a lot of fluidity about who lives where. So like, auntie and grandma and the grown children with their kids now all live in separate little houses kind of nearby each other. So the children oftentimes will, oh, you go stay with grandma tonight because she needs somebody to like help her chop the wood, so you're going to go stay with her. Or grandma's house is closer to school, it's across the creek, and so maybe the creek will rise tomorrow and you won't be able to cross it, so go stay over there, right? So people, where they actually sleep is a lot more fluid than maybe in our community. And so any of those things might go into giving us different answers, right? If you count every structure in the community and who is in that structure at certain times, you might get a very different answer because than if somebody who's counting households, or if you count that person and they're over in the cookhouse and then you go to the next building and you see that same person over there, like how do you place them, right? So those are just some examples of kind of this subjective versus objective way of doing, aspect of participant observation. Do you think this subjectivity is a problem that we need to overcome? Is that part two of your question? Why or why not? Is subjectivity that we've established there is subjectivity going on? Is it a problem? And if so, how might we overcome it? As in all things anthropology, the answer is it's yes and no, right? It's both. What are some ways that it might be a problem? That's kind of easier. What's that?
It messes with data.
Yeah, it messes with data, right? If I'm trying to actually do a survey of how many households are in different communities, and I send all of you out to different communities, you're going to San Antonio, you're going to San Jose, you're going to Criqui and we don't standardize a method, right? Like I don't say count number of cookhouses, right, as a way of counting households, or only count people who are physically present in the house when you're doing your survey. If I don't give you explicit directions, I'm going to get all kinds of data that doesn't necessarily match up. So when I make my district level census, it doesn't actually mesh. And so like when I was in college, I actually got a job it paid like $20 an hour, which is a lot of money back in 2000, to be a census enumerator for the US 2000 census, right? And so we did this whole class. It was like a 2-week class before they even let us go in the field about like what counts, right? Like when you count households, this is what is included, right? It needs to be a physical residence. They need to have their mail sent here. They need to be here at least 6 months of the year. That way, when they collected all the data from all the people, tens of thousands of people doing census enumeration across the US, it was compatible and they could stick it together to make a big census document. So that's one, that's a great example of how being too subjective or just doing your own thing might cause problems. But what are some maybe benefits or some ways that subjectivity might not be a problem? Why might we be interested in not just flattening out all the subjectivity and just getting rid of it and standardizing all of our experiences? Or do we want to? We don't want to. We're cultural anthropologists, man. We want that subjective experience. And why?
We want to document the real experience.
Yeah. And there's often this tendency in cultural, especially when you're trying to be subjective, to like remove yourself from the equation, right? That like this is, I am a camera or a video camera, and I am just observing and recording what's going on in this community, right? I'm just recording the ghost stories of Eastern New Mexico or the farming practices in San Jose, but our presence being there is going to affect people. The questions that we ask might get people to think about things that they've never actually bothered to think about before. It might actually spur them to change when you're like, why do you travel 2 hours each way to your farm? Why don't you why don't you guys advocate for a road? And you're like, oh, let's start a grant proposal and you can help us write it. And I'm like, oh, dang it. But our presence affects the situation. Also, we are really interested in our different subjective experiences. Like, just like we talked about with positionality, you're going to get different access to things based on who you are. And so saying things like, this is what life is like in San Jose, right, is going to be very different for you than for me or for Jose, right? Because we're all going to have very different kind of subjective perceptions. And actually having those different perspectives is really good for us in anthropology. It's why we don't just send one researcher to Belize and be like, oh, we've done it, right? Because all of us who go there and do our research are going to have different perspectives because we're coming from different places, right? Myself is going to have a different perspective from Jose just because of our different research interests and also our different life trajectories, right? And so having those kind of subjective things, right? It's like the parable of the blind men describing the elephant, right? Some are describing the tail, some are describing the trunk and how the ears feel and the foot feel, and kind of putting all those together, we can get a better understanding of what's actually going on. Okay. The last question that we're going to do is kind of the steps in field work, and Bernard lays this out on 378. I'm going to switch to doc cam. Let's see if this works. think not very good handwriting. This is kind of a general timeline. He does these like stages of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or so different stages of field work. And this is kind of set up for people doing like year-long field work. And it would be modified for shorter fields. But again, why might he set this up for like a 12-month plus kind of field work? What's that relate to? What kind of people are doing 12-month field work? Yeah, it's usually your dissertation or your PhD is when you're going to do this, right? But again, you can kind of a lot of these things are going to be very similar, either condensed or compressed, or just kind of like chopped off, when you go home. And so this is kind of month 1 through 12. You don't have to necessarily start in the first month of January. It's whenever you start. And he says that there is kind of a definite step or a series of steps that people go through when they start doing fieldwork. And he doesn't just kind of make this idly off the top of his head, right? It's based on him and his colleagues doing over 40 years of fieldwork, but also Bernard, I think he still does. I think he's still like active enough to do this. Him and Clarence Gravely and a couple of his other former students run every year a methodological field school. So if you're interested in doing like a summer methodology through field school through UF, it's a really great program, and it's where a lot of this information in the book comes from. And so they kind of worked with students, and they got to kind of see how this actually plays out, over lots of students doing this for 20 years or something like that. He says that when you first start to do field work, oftentimes the first stage is initial contact, right? And this is, there are just wonderful accounts of these first contact things, right? I love Chagnon's one. I looked up and gasped when I saw dozens of burly, naked, sweaty, hideous men staring down at us from the shafts of their drawn arrows. Had there been a diplomatic way out, I would have ended my field work then and there. Right? And Malinowski has a very similar one, right? Like him being shipwrecked on the beach, and like they put him on the beach with all his stuff, and they wave goodbye, and now he is in and amongst the local people, right? And oftentimes this is like a very shocking kind of thing, right? We think about field work before we do it, and we kind of imagine it in our mind. But once you actually get there, there's like kind of this oh shit moment. Like now this is really happening, and it's really happening, right? And oftentimes, right, there's this initial tendency to want to get out of there. It's often best if you don't leave yourself an out, right? Like you've got there on the bus and the next bus isn't coming for 3 days, or you come in on boat and the boat is turned around and left, right? So you are forced to be there because the first couple days of field work are extremely long, right? Like, and you'll kind of remember them vividly because everything's so new, right? Like the first week or so, you're just like, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? Everything is weird here. Everything is different. I haven't slept at all because I'm trying to sleep in this hammock and I'm not really a hammock sleeper. This food has given my gut some weird issues. The schedule is strange. I don't like getting up at 5 in the morning, or there is no privacy at all in this community, right? People just looking at you all day from the moment you get up to the time you go to bed. Right? It's just a lot. And this kind of bleeds into the number 2, like sometime in the first months leading into the second one, this kind of stage of culture shock, right? Oftentimes during the kind of culture shock stage, everything starts to set in, just like how different and weird wherever you are, right? And this can be from the exotic to the pretty local. But whether it's the bed being weird, or the food being weird, or all the things that people talk about, or your lack of privacy, right? It starts to get to you. You start to feel down. You start to feel kind of overwhelmed or depressed. Grendel talks about that when he first gets there, right? He would bury himself in detective novels every afternoon just to like try to get some peace and order in his mind, just because it's a lot. And this can be everything from like, there's just always something that might set you off. Like for me, it was like being, spending my afternoon baking a loaf of bread and then going to get something and then having a stray dog jump in my house and eat my loaf of bread. And I just think like, I hate you, right? Or being sick in the middle of the night and having to use the scary outhouse, with your flashlight and all the bugs and everything, just being like, this is just too much, right? And often your first sickness happens during this time. Field work, especially in other countries, is just like a revolving door of sicknesses. And it really makes it hard to keep your spirits up when you're physically ill, as well as maybe lonely because you're the only person like you for miles or hours in any direction. You might often think that like people are making fun of you, or you're like you don't really understand the language maybe very well, and you're like, what's going on? You feel kind of left out. And the big one is privacy. A lot of communities have no privacy at all. Like there's no, I don't know any word for lonely in Maya. Do you, Jose? I don't think yeah, weak, sick.
Yeah, weak, sick.
Something like that. Like if you want to be alone and you want like privacy, people are like, oh, you must be sick. Are you dying? Are you like, is something wrong with you? And this can be, it's not like I've been hiding for days. This is me at 7 o'clock in the morning, still in my hammock, and then having the children next door come to make sure I'm still alive because, well, you didn't get up and you didn't go to farm with everybody else. Like nobody saw you. Like everybody was watching what you were doing. That's all they do is like, watch the white guy. Nobody saw you go to farm this morning. What's up, right? Or, everyone saw you take your bath in the middle of the day today. Is something weird? Is something up? Like, are you going somewhere tomorrow? Or people just like will talk about you all the time, right? Especially in a small community, because you're like, it's a small town. They don't have TV. They don't have like the internet very much. So it's like you're the object of spectacle, right? You're the new guy who's in town or new gal. And people are always gossiping about you because that's what people do. But lest you think that it's all doom and gloom, by about month 2 and kind of into week 3, you start feeling like things are starting to turn around, right? And a lot of this is because you got to do field work, right? If you were one of the benefits of doing participant observation or doing, having an actual research project instead of just kind of going native and living, I want to live in a Maya village forever. I had a list of things I had to do. I have to do this survey. I have to do a household census. I have to figure out how much chocolate people have. I have to draw these kinship trees, right? It gets you out of your rut and it gets you out of your depression because you're just like, well, I just got to go do something, right? And eventually doing something is how you get your footing. And you start to do things. I started to go around and ask people about how many chocolate. I start to go to people's farms, right? I was basically free labor and be like, hey, do you want me to go like chop bush with you? Or do you want me to help you like build your house or something? I don't care. I don't have anything going on. And pretty soon people start like opening up to you. And there's usually a moment where you feel like you've crossed some kind of liminal threshold and you've gone from outsider to insider. In my case, it was month, 6 weeks or so into it, right around Thanksgiving. And people had been vaguely polite, kind of standoffish, knew that I was like doing chocolate stuff, but nobody had like really like opened up, except for like maybe the community, the family that we were staying with. We eat with them every day, so they were a little more open, but still, we were like weird outsiders. And this was made worse by the week that we moved to this community. 2 Maya children from another community had gone missing. Maya people had gone to, this is a weird story, had gone to town and found this Guatemalan fortune teller and had her read the fortunes of the children. And she said that the white people who owned the crocodile sanctuary had stolen them and fed them to the crocodiles in some kind of weird magical sexual ritual thing. You can imagine that was not a great introduction to white people moving to their community, right? So people were obviously standoffish, and children would run away screaming like when they saw us, right? Obviously, they didn't do that. The fortune teller is kind of the epilogue, right? The Maya people got their torches and machetes, went to the crocodile sanctuary, broke down the gates, slaughtered the crocodiles, cut them open. We're disappointed to find there were no children inside. Burned down the compound, chased the white people away. They all got arrested. The Maya Leaders Alliance, one of his research topics, they got like another 1,000 or 2 Maya together, went and rallied downtown, got all the people sprung from jail because they said that, well, they were just following what the fortune teller said, right? The fortune teller had told them that it was there, so they were just doing what they said. So the fortune teller went to jail for telling a false fortune, right? Because there was no children. If you had told a true fortune, it would have been different. But so all the Maya went free because they were just, they got duped by this false fortune teller. I don't know about the legality of that. That would fly here in Portales. But so anyway, that was kind of the situation where, month 1 and 2, culture shock, people being kind of wary of us, screaming children whenever we would appear. Until the week of Thanksgiving, sitting in my hammock, being depressed because nobody wants to talk to me and everything's kind of weird. Until my neighbor is like, hey, you want to go see the house fire? Sure, like, because that's what you always do. You say, yeah. And right across the street, probably 200 yards away from where this 2-story house, one of the biggest in the community, was a block house. The family was pretty well off by Maya standards. They had, 2-story block house instead of a thatch house. They had a corn mill where they would charge people, a quarter to like mill your corn. And they had a shop. What else did those Chos have? They were well off people. And the house was just up in flames, right? And because it was a modern house, they had propane instead of just cook fires. So there was like kind of random explosions and fires going off everywhere. And what was shocking was there was just a crowd of people, probably 100+ people, just standing there watching it, arms crossed, right? Not helping at all. And the family who lived there was kind of going crazy, like running into the house, trying to pull stuff out. Pull out the cash box or pull out my clothes or my phone or whatever, pulling everything they could out as this fire was kind of raging. And people were just kind of watching it. And it was because those people were rich and people were kind of vexed that they were, had more than everybody else. So they were just kind of happy to see it go. But my wife and I, we jumped in there. We got our machetes, we got our axes. I invented the bucket brigade, right? Everybody take a bucket and you pass it to somebody else. When we put out the fire and we kept it from spreading, there's a great picture of us just like covered in soot with like our tools and stuff. And by the end of the day, we were celebrities, right? The white people, like they jumped in. Oh, there was like a little bit of like, talking smack about the neighbors. Like you guys just stood here and watched that burn. And look at the white people. They like jumped in there. They put their, they helped out in the community, right? They're part of us now. And suddenly there was like, it was like Clifford Geertz Balinese cockfight story, right? As soon as nobody wanted to talk to him until, they're watching this illegal chicken fighting game, the cops come to bust it up. And then rather than like, narking on their informants and going to the cops, they ran away like everybody else. And after that, like you're in, right? People know you. Oh, you're that guy, right? You're the one who put out the house fire. And suddenly discoveries start like, coming in full force. People want to talk to you. People invite you to all kinds of things, whether it's weddings or, go to my farm or, hey, we're going on our football team is going over to Maphrodite and we're going to play in the tournament. You guys should come along. And so there's just lots of opportunities and you get lots of data and everything's brand new and you feel like almost every day is like a new discovery. You're just like, you get these things. I got a new piece of data and now it's going to lead me to my next discovery. And it just feels like it's all coming together. And that goes on for a little while until you need to like take a break because it gets like overwhelming and you start to feel like you're running into dead ends. Like I've heard this answer over and over and over. Take a little break. A week is usually what we would do. We'd go out to the coast and stay in a little cottage at the beach, which was like, 3 hours away from the community, which is nice because you can get on the bus in the morning, you can be at the beach by noon, and then you could stay there all weekend or all week and then come back. And you feel refreshed. You got, people are excited to see you again. You got new questions. You maybe have time to write some field notes that are more like high level instead of just like, this is what I did today. You can be like kind of overview stuff or like, these are some of the insights that I've had. You come back and oftentimes, by about halfway through your field work, you've really started to come up with some like really good questions. You've got all the basic stuff kind of out of the way and you have some like real key things you're looking for, and whether that, and oftentimes it's beyond the initial of like, how many cacao trees do you have or how much did you sell, right? You can be like, why did you stop doing this ritual, right? I'm really interested in this, or I got really interested in the Chayil, these like mythical cacao creatures that own the cacao. And so I was like collecting cacao Chayil stories, right? So tell me a story about Chayil, and people would tell you all these stories about weird encounters they had in the forest, or somebody's like, I found a piece of pottery that has a picture of a Chayil on it, I felt like, I was really getting good stuff. But after a while, you just get exhausted. And usually for me, this was in dry season. Once it starts getting really hot and people are a little cranky and, people start to get a little tired of you asking questions. And again, that's a good time for another break. And you can come back, especially towards the end, and you often feel like you're kind of on the clock as you get closer towards the end. Like in the beginning and in the middle, you're like, this is going to take forever. Before I went to the field, I was like, I have to live in this place for a whole year. That seems like forever, right? And when you're starting, you're just like, I have so much time. Like, I'll just do this stuff later. But as you get towards the end, you're like, oh my God, like I'm running out of time. I have all this stuff I need to do. I need to do like a kinship chart. I need to finish my census. I need to finish collecting production data for the last 45 houses, right? So as you get closer to the end, oftentimes the pace of research and month 10 or 11 really picks up as you're like frantically trying to do things. Like I would do a few interviews now and then for the first 6 months, but it was like really the last 2 months where I did like 75% of my interviews because I was like, oh no, I'm running out of time. I need to get this done. But it was also really efficient to do it that way because I had 10 months to build up those relationships, right? Because I was able to be like, call on everyone I knew over the last year. Like, hey, remember I went to your farm like 6 months ago? Hey, let's do that interview we talked about. Or, hey, remember I met you at this wedding a few months ago, and you said you would talk to me about your chocolate, right? So I was able to like pull on all those connections right at the end, and kind of build off of your participant observation. That's what you're actually going to do in here, right? That's why we started participant observation so early, is that as you get towards the end of this project and you're like, oh no, I have to do some surveys, or like I need to do 4 more pile sorts, you're able to draw on those networks. And finally, at the very end, there's this period of goodbyes where your research suddenly kind of starts to slacken off a little bit because you don't really have time. There's so much social obligations at the end, right? Everybody is going to want to have a goodbye dinner with you multiple times. There were days where I would go to 3 goodbye dinners in a row, and I would be like so like physically ill from eating too much food, and just like I'm gonna burst, please. And like if you turn down food, what happens, Jose?
No, they're like, it's a cake, it's a dog, and they're eating it
Yeah,
again.
they never get right, and they'll remember that forever.
Yeah.
You eat some like weird stuff because you don't want to like make it, but like even like and it's not just like oh, I'm gonna eat like a little token amount. I was thinking like Francisco's house, man, like the giant pile of food, and then be like, you have to do your task, or like here's a pack of 12 tortillas. You're just like, I just physically cannot eat it, and then it's like, well, the little boy does it over there, or like my daughter does it, so why can't you, right? So you're obligated to go all these things, right? Every person is kind of wants to see you. And if you don't see them, it's always a thing, right? The next time you come back, Candido always is like, why didn't you come say goodbye? And you're like, well, like we're not really that close, like I kind of know you, but like we're not like buds or anything like that. But like it's always this thing. And then there's like this one more stage, right? Is that ideally you come back in the future. In a lot of communities, a lot of your really good data comes after you come back, right? Whatever time period that is, however long you've been there and however long you've been away. People will remember you, and it shows like good faith and good intentions that you came back. Like, well, you lived here for a year and you still decided to come back. You must really like it here, right? And so oftentimes that's a time of renewal of these relationships, and especially if you can bring gifts. People love gifts. Flashlights, little of the solar garden lights, Stanley thermoses, so you can carry your soup to the farm, anything like that. Like I don't know about you, Jose, but like I feel like going down there, my suitcase is always full of treasures, and coming back, it's always full of baskets.
Correct.
And going through customs, they're always like, "Why do you need 30 flashlights?"
Yeah.
You're like, they're like, "Are you selling flashlights?" Why would I come to Belize to sell flashlights? But they're always like super suspicious, because you're not supposed to carry in goods without paying tax on them. But there is that kind of relation. So the cycle will kind of start again. And then the second time you go, it's a little easier because you don't get those culture shock. You don't get that period where people are like weird and standoffish around you. They may not quite remember you. They might mix you up with someone else. They still call me Henry because there was a Peace Corps guy who was there before, who was also somewhere between 5'8" and 6'2", vaguely blonde, brown hair, white skin, right? People were, they kind of mixed us all together. But but they were all happy to see us, and especially now that we have kids, people are super excited to see us. Like, oh, now you're a man, right? And I was like, I was a man before. I was like 35. And they're like, no, but like now you are a man. Now we'll teach you all the things that you need to know to be a dad, right? And it gives people new things to talk to, especially as you stay there longer, right? The kids who we grew up with, who were little kids, Augustine was like 3 when we started doing fieldwork. They're now in college, or they have families of their own, right? These kids who are like 8 or 9 now have like children who are the same age as mine. And you can make relationships, become godparents, or we funded like 10 kids to go to school, high school in that community. And so kind of doing these long-term connections with people really help it for when you come back, especially if you don't have a full year to do research, to kind of get that information in a much faster way and build off of your past stuff. Okay, that's it for today. We are done with kind of talking about the activity of participant observation. But next time, we're going to talk about like when you do participant observation, what you actually write down. What's the good stuff to put in your field notes, and how do you make it evocative both for your reader later, but also help you remember as a researcher what you actually saw. So come back next week for that. Okay, that's it. And if you have any questions about your participant observation, or you want to kind of spitball ideas, or you're not sure what you want to do, please feel free to contact me. So thanks so much for coming out. I'll have a great week, and I'll see you next time.